Hey, John, this is Joe. Are you going to be running the meeting then? Should I make you a host to admit people?
Yeah, I think Dale is going to try to call in, but he did ask if I would go ahead and run the meeting.
Okay, I'll make you the co-host so you can admit people and everybody.
Great, thank you. Should we go ahead and get started, probably?
Yeah, I just need to know who the owner is that has their name as owner so I can rename you in the 407-0345. I need to know who you are as well.
Hi, this is the owner. This is John Connor, and hello, everyone.
Hey, John, Dave here.
Hello.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Missoula Parks and Recreation September the 8th, 2020 meeting. All the meeting body members are attending this meeting virtually, and public comment will be made via a live call-in phone line. Those numbers will be displayed on the screen and are either toll-free at 888-475-4499 if you're on a landline, or 253-215-8782. The meeting ID is 960-049-3694. As a reminder to all of our board members, please do not use the chat feature in Zoom during this meeting. Shortly, I will call for general public comment, and I will take comments on items that are either on the agenda or that are not on the agenda. I will also open the public comment on each agenda item. Each time we call for public comment, we'll put the numbers on the screen and the meeting ID and give some time for you to go to your phones and call in. But you may want to write those numbers down. When you call in, you'll be placed into a waiting room, and I will take calls in the order that they come in. When I call on you, please mute your TV or computer, or there will be an echo. Tell us your name and your comment. Please be aware there is a delay of about 50 seconds from what you're hearing at home and the actual meeting. It is okay to begin speaking right away when I call your name. I'll be observing a speaking limit of 3 minutes so we can hear from anyone and everyone. So let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick reminder also to board members, please keep your microphone on mute unless you are commenting or speaking. I'd like to call the meeting of the Missoula Parks and Recreation Board to order. Can we please have a roll call of members to determine who is present?
Dale Harris. Ross Molenhauer. Wendy Nittman.
Here.
John O'Connor.
Here.
Sonia Verlanik,
Here.
Daniel Gunlock,
Here.
Margie Costa.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item 1.2, approval of the minutes. I hope everyone's had an opportunity to review the minutes. I'm opening it for a motion.
This is Margie. I make a motion that we adopt the minutes from the last meeting.
Is there a second?
This is Sonia. I second.
Any discussion or corrections in the minutes? We'll now take a vote. Please unmute your microphone. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are adopted. We'll now move on to agenda item 1.3. Do we have any announcements?
John, and Park Board members. This is Donna Gockler, Director, Parks and Recreation. Primary announcements include adoption of the city budget and CIP for fiscal year 21. We'll go through some of the highlights toward the end of the meeting as time allows. One of the most exciting projects or initiatives that's been approved is a Lowell School West Side Neighborhood Community Center concept. And we are working on an interlocal government agreement with MCPS. And I have, quite the enthusiasm around that. I also wanted to let all of you know that we have been applying for CARES funding to provide additional childcare, mostly day camp services, which we would be offering out of the Missoula Public Library, which we would rename Base Camp. And other than that, we continue working in a COVID-19 environment, having considerable success. Currents is back open for fall. Splash just closed on Sunday, would have been open yesterday except for weather. And I think that's all I have for you now. I'll provide more of an update later.
Thank you, Donna. Any other announcements? Okay, we'll move on to item 1.4, public and guest comments. I will now unmute the person in the waiting room. If you want to take yourself off of mute, if you have a comment, please go ahead. This is one of those long pause moments while we wait to see if there's anybody else that wants to get to their phone. All right, seeing no guest or public comments, we'll move into our action items. We'll start with agenda item 2.1, Glacial Lake Missoula Stone Marker at the Overlook Viewpoint. Morgan, are you on the call?
Morgan, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, good. Sorry, my work computer does not have a phone or a camera or a microphone, so I'm working off a phone and a computer at this time. Do we have Mindy Mason on the call as well?
I don't see
All right.
Megan on the call, Morgan.
Okay, well, I will get going. We've got a request here to expand the amount of interpretive installations on city open space having to do with historic glacial Lake Missoula. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can you guys see what's going on now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. So several years ago, the park board approved placing 2 different Glacial Lake Missoula beach line markers at the historic high water mark of Glacial Lake Missoula, which is around 4,200 feet. Right now, open on my screen, you can see what these rocks look like. And you know, we actually went through, I think it took a couple of park board meetings to really get these approved. One of our goals for open space conservation lands is the majority of our park preserves, we have most of our infrastructure at the trailhead. And so we wanted to really design a way to allow the Ice Age Flood Institute to interpret what Glacial Lake Missoula was and how it affected our valley, to provide some high water marks that are pretty much low profile, fit in with the landscape really well. And what was settled on were these boulders at the 4,200 foot mark. One of these was, 2 of these were placed on Mount Jumbo, one on the Backbone Trail and one just above the L. And one of them was placed on the Pengelly Trail going up the side of Mount Sentinel. It has worked great. They're incredibly well received. They're pretty easy to install. And then they meet the goals of being pretty low profile. You don't really know it's there until you're standing right next to it. And it's actually been, I think, something the public has really liked. And in front of you today is a request to add an additional Glacial Lake Missoula beach mark. Hold on. At the top of the South Hills Spur Trail. And so the proposal is to add it at the Overlook in the South Hills. This is a great location because you can sit at this location and look down the side of Mount Sentinel and see actual beach lines. This is the view from the top of the South Hills Spur to Mount Sentinel. The request today is to install one of these stones at this overlook. This does fit with the South Hill Spur adopted recreation management plan that the CLAC developed and the park board adopted, which does allow for actually a more developed interpretive signage at the site. We did not specify what would be interpreted at this location. This would probably not fill that need that we identified within the South Hill Spur Rec management plan of actually having more low profile actual, signs with photos and words. But this would be a start of interpreting a theme at this site that is not just a great viewpoint and vantage point for viewing Glacial Lake Missoula, but also, this area would be just above the lake shore. So it would actually be kind of a cool spot to have one of these stones. Overall, there's strong staff support for this. We already have the boulders. Glacial Lake Missoula Ice Age Flood Institute already has the boulders, and it would just be coordinating and getting them installed on site. It'd be probably a few hours of work for one of my staff to help the Glacial Lake Missoula folks get this installed. So the request before Park Board now is to allow for the installation of this rock at the South Hill Spur Overlook area.
Thank you, Morgan. I do see that Mindy called in, and I've admitted her into the waiting room now. On this agenda item 2.1, we're now going to open it up to public comment before we take any other action from the board. If you'd like to comment, please raise your hand and we'll go ahead and get you in. Mindy, did you have a comment?
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry I'm late. I didn't realize we had changed the Zoom meeting.
No problem.
So Mindy, I don't know if you heard it. This is Morgan Valiant. I gave a quick synopsis of the project and the projects we've done in the past, and then what you're proposing here. I think overall I mentioned that the concept has strong staff support, and it seems like something we can pretty easily get done. I don't know if there's any other details that you wanted to add before the park board took on this action item.
I actually heard just the tail end of the last comments that you had made when I joined the meeting, and I don't believe I have anything else to add. I can't think of anything else that I didn't put in the proposal, but yeah, if anybody entertains any other comments, I'd be glad to comment on those or give any additional information that I might have.
Thanks, Mindy. If you want to go ahead and mute your phone,
Sure.
unless we have some other questions for you, that'd be great. Do we have any other
Yes.
comment from the public? I hear no other comment, and I see nobody else in the waiting room. This is an action item. It'd be great to get a motion from somebody.
This is Margie Costa, and I recommend that we approve placement of the Glacial Lake Missoula stone on the South Hill Spur Overlook, and the exact location to be determined by Missoula Parks and Rec. And Glacial.
And this is Wendy Nintman with a second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the motion, please. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion passes. I do have a quick comment. When we do our votes by roll call, do we need to take our names and do it individually, or can we do just the ayes and nays? And if there are nays, then we can say names at that point in time. Is that fair?
We'll need to do names for the next action items.
Okay, we'll do that. So we'll move on to action item 2.2. Morgan, this is also you. Bancroft Ponds Outdoor Classroom.
Yeah, thank you. And I've got a couple folks from the neighborhood, Dave Westfeld and John Connor, who have been really spearheading this project. And I'm going to turn it largely over to them, but I did want to just provide a little bit of background before we get into it. And pulling up some graphics here since I've got a screen share mode going. So Bancroft Ponds is located there behind Patty Creek Market over at the base of the South Hills. And it is an incredibly loved park and gets probably the highest level of use by our educators. It's walking distance of multiple different schools. It's also used by other nonprofit organizations like the Natural Heritage or History Center and the Clark Fork Coalition to take students to really have them learn about native and non-native plants, the importance of habitat, the importance of water quality. And several years ago, the leadership of the Lewis and Clark neighborhood came together to really look at sprucing up the park. And myself and my team have been working closely with the Lewis and Clark neighborhood leadership and a smaller subset of their neighborhood group, which is for Bancroft Pond Steering Committee, to really do some good things in the park. And we've had a lot of great success. We've improved some trails. We've added more signage. We've greatly increased habitat within the park. And all of this is in fitting with a plan that was developed in 1996 or adopted in 1996, which was actually drafted by Lewis and Clark neighbors. And it was a pretty extensive public process they went through, came up with a lot of different alternatives. This plan is definitely a little bit old, but you know, some of the big things as far as providing better trails, providing bridges, providing water control structures, providing more signage in the parks, providing more habitat is stuff we've met. And, you know, here's a quick little view of the preferred alternative. One thing here recently that we've heard loud and clear from a lot of the schools and a lot of the folks that are doing programming within the park is there's really not a suitable place to bring students into the park, sit them all down, get them all organized, get your lessons planned together, and then move from there. And so for the past several years, we've been playing around with the idea of putting an outdoor classroom in the park. I'm not going to get into the details on this. I'll let John and Dave do it. And certainly, if John O'Connor wants to add anything to this request, he certainly can. So essentially what we're looking at doing a kind of a natural outdoor classroom in a corner of the park. This proposal did go to the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee back in, I believe, April or early March. It was so long ago. And so the request is to actually add outdoor classroom as part of the master plan for the park. And that really received overwhelming support from the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee, and they voted unanimously to recommend that the park board allow this to occur. And so at that point, I'm just going to turn it on over to Dave and John Connor to talk a little bit about the project and kind of what they're kind of working on as far as funding and concepts.
All right, this is John. Can everyone hear me? I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Morgan, for the great introduction and description. And really, you know, he's covered it quite well, folks. This has been one of our goals and was brought to us at first from a teacher from Lewis and Clark Elementary who's been going there for a number of years and said, just would it be nice to have a place where we could, you know, get that control that Morgan discussed. And so we really wanted to do this last year. We switched around a little bit at the end of the year and used our neighborhood grant application for interpretive signs, and those a little COVID delayed, but that's approved and the money's there and we're going forward. So for 2021, this classroom is on our agenda. We met with Nathan McLeod and walked the property, and we walked with Morgan, but I met just recently with Nathan to make sure that our design was, you know, up to standard for all the ADA considerations and so forth. We made some minor tweaks to it, but just great involvement from the staff, so hats off to all the folks there. We had a concept drawing and description that we used at the CELAC meeting, and I'll just quote from that real briefly. And this is right from the grant application under the project summary title. It says, in coordination with Missoula Parks and Rec and instructors from local schools, we propose to construct an outdoor classroom in Bancroft Ponds Park. In keeping with the park's management plan's restrictions to use only natural materials, the classroom shall be constructed of the argillite stone seating benches arranged in a classic amphitheater design. We're going to have appropriate complementary landscaping consisting of native trees and shrubs, and connecting gravel pathways will be included. And actually, my mistake here, we scratched the shrubs in conversation with Nathan as being vision obstructed. We think that would be appropriate. And the final piece of the project will be an awareness outreach program to the local schools of this new neighborhood asset. And that will be accomplished by the Lewis and Clark neighborhood leadership team. So, you know, just briefly, and for those of you that are familiar with the park, it's just at the intersection of the trails on the east end. As you come up on the Park Loop Trail, we're going to put in a at-grade gravel pad, no elevation changes, put some landscape cloth underneath it. And I think the last count I had, I haven't seen Nathan's final design, but we were at 18 stone seating benches. We moved the spacing out a little bit so that we could get wheelchair access if that were to be accomplished. And that was really about the only big changes. So if you just imagine a small amphitheater of stones, just like you see along the trails in other parks, and a classroom of squirmy Lewis and Clark students setting there, this gives them some ability to organize and to get the lesson started off correctly. For our part, we wanted to make sure that we kept it natural and kind of unobtrusive, and with the height of the grass that'll surround it, you're going to have to be just about on top of it to say, oh, what's this? And we think that meets the goals. So that's where we're at in it. We did determine, you know, with discussions with Morgan, that this probably will require an addendum to the master plan, just so it's really spelled out that this is an approved use, and that's why we're in front of you folks today, and hoping that we can get that accomplished, and then we can move forward with writing of a neighborhood grant to fund it. And that's really all I have. You know, this is the kind of the end of a long process, and then we can move forward on actual implementation with the approval of the board. With that, I'll open it to any questions anyone has, and appreciate the comments.
Thank you, John. So as the park board liaison to CLAC, I'll just say that it was April, I believe, when this was brought to the committee, and there were a lot of, you know, questions and comments about angles to protect kids from sun and line of sight. So making sure that everybody was protected, how high they would be, what it would do to the overall aesthetic of the park. And I think everybody on the CLAC was quite pleased with the thought and the design that went into this. So that's just my my recollection from that meeting, and unanimously we all supported this. Okay, so this is agenda item 2.2. And before we make a motion or take any action, we are going to open this up to any comments from the public. Go ahead if you were admitted into the waiting room as the owner, and if you have any comments that you'd like to make, please unmute your speaker and identify yourself and go ahead and make your comments. All right, just to make sure I'm doing this correctly, person who is identified as owner and who was admitted from the waiting room, if you have any comment, go ahead and unmute yourself now. Having seen no comment from the public, this is an action item. In order for discussions, I'd go ahead and entertain a motion, please.
I can make a motion. This is Danny. 1 second. I recommend the amendment to the adopted master plan for Bancroft Ponds natural area to allow for the addition of an outdoor classroom of natural stone benches located in the northeast corner of the park.
Thank you, Danny. Is there a second?
This is Ross. I'll second.
Thank you, Ross. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. We'll do a roll call vote, please.
Dale? Ross?
Aye.
Wendy?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Sonia?
Aye.
Danny?
Aye.
Margie?
Aye.
Did you get my vote?
I did not. Is this Dale?
Yes.
I have you, Dale.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Dale, I'm assuming you are identified as owner on the Zoom call right now.
I'm not sure why, but I guess I'm owner.
You deserve to be owner, Dale. All right, we'll move on to our last action item for today. That's agenda item 2.3, request fee category to special use permit for small groups. And this is Shirley, staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Shirley Kinsey, Recreation Superintendent. So this is a request asking that Park Board approve the establishment of a fee for small groups under 10 participants to this special use permit.
Hey, Shirley, can I interrupt you for just 1 second? Morgan, if you don't mind, would you please stop sharing your screen?
I'm trying to figure out how to do that now.
All right. If you
But
hover
yeah.
over the bottom, Morgan, there should be an item that pops up that says stop sharing.
Aha.
Great. Thanks, Shirley. Go ahead, Shirley.
Okay, so over the years, we've had comment that our fees associated with the special use permit, whether it was the daily fee or the reduced seasonal rate, was just too high for smaller groups. So I did quite a bit of research. I reviewed our existing fee structures, and we do charge a $10 an hour fee for tennis pros. Normally, tennis pros have up to 4 participants per hour on the courts. And so, and I also reached out to Billings, who is identified in one of the people requesting lower fees, Fit for Mom. And I reached out to Corey Thompson, the recreation superintendent over there, and had some interesting dialogue with him. Evidently, they do just a permit administration fee right now versus any kind of use for private business. And this year was the first year that they actually allowed private businesses to use the park facilities. So I found that kind of interesting. But what we're looking to do is add a category of $10 an hour for nonprofit groups and $15 an hour for profit groups. And I kind of looked at the what that compared out to be in terms of meeting 2 or 3 times a week. And I think that those fees are fair, and it's a good compromise.
Thank you, Shirley. Before we take this action item up, we're going to go ahead and open this up for public comment. If you'd like to comment on this agenda item, please raise your hand. Hearing no public comment, I will entertain a motion from the board to begin discussions.
This is Wendy, and I make a motion to approve the staff recommendation to establish a fee for small groups under 10 participants to the special use permit. And that will establish a fee of $15 an hour per class for for-profit businesses and $10 an hour a class for nonprofit organizations.
Thank you, Wendy. Is there a second?
This is Sonia. I'll second.
Thank you, Sonia. Is there any comment or discussion?
Yeah, this is Ross. I'm still a little confused about, $15 an hour for someone who's like a for-profit tennis instructor on a tennis. They're only getting paid, say, by somebody's parents, say for a kid's tennis lesson. I think it's like $20 or $25 an hour is what they're charging. Are you saying that $15 an hour would be a fee they would have to pay the Parks Department for using tennis courts?
No, the tennis courts fee has been established. It's $10 an hour for professional instructors to teach on the courts.
What's the move action?
This is a fee specific for a special use permit. So they're using parks, trails, whatever infrastructure they deem like they want to use.
And Shirley, maybe if you just refer to the staff recommendation about what the current fees cost. I'm reading an email from Corey Thompson that says based upon the current fees, they would be paying $150 per park location per season under the current fee structure. Is that correct?
And that's in Billings.
Okay. Do you want to just kind of then give us a little clarification on the changes from the present to what this would do?
So currently, the only thing that we have in place for the special use permit is if you get a seasonal rate, it establishes. If you look on the second page, I put a chart in there, 1 to 9 days and 10 plus days. So currently it's $281 for 1 to 9 days. And when you start dividing that out by 10 participants, it's a fairly significant fee. It was established for groups up to 100. And so it makes it a little bit more economical for someone to get either a daily special use permit or a seasonal rate permit for their larger groups. These fees don't really, they don't really relate to a smaller group. So we have a nonprofit group who is currently asking to use trails. Fit to Fight is a group of a class size of 5 or 6 cancer survivors, and they are wanting to use the trails for fitness walking. And I think that a compromise for an hourly rate is a good compromise to the special use permit for a seasonal rate and up to 100 people. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I just don't recall when we went through this discussion why we did not consider a small group rate to begin with. Does anybody remember that?
I didn't propose it.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote on the motion.
Dale,
Yes.
Ross,
Aye.
Wendy,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Sonia,
Yes.
Danny,
Aye.
Margie.
Aye.
That concludes our action items. We'll now move into our presentations with item 3.1. Donna, Director Report.
Thank you, John. And again, greetings to everybody. A few additional updates. I mentioned some of the work around the COVID-19 pandemic in our efforts at Parks and Recreation to provide additional childcare services across the community, particularly aimed at essential workers. We also are continuing our work in inclusion and equity, and with recent events this summer, the mayor's office is contracting with Spider McKnight and working with Learn, and Parks and Recreation will be part of that as well. And we do continue to work with all of our partners across the community. Our efforts related to the Lowell School West Side neighborhood continue to progress. Nathan McLeod is working on phase 1 construction documents, which would include the preschool playground at West Side, removing the old shelter and restroom, replacing them with modern facilities that much better meet CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. Recent events, in addition to funding the neighborhood community center concept, is we've had excellent conversations with the Resurrection Cemetery Association, which is a support organization to the Catholic Diocese and actually manage the cemetery on the north side, the Catholic cemetery. And the north side ball diamond, some of you may not have realized, has never been city owned. And we have been operating without an agreement for perhaps 15 years or longer. And most recently, we've been given the go-ahead to enter into a 50-year agreement with renewable 20-year additions, so that we will be able to begin making improvements to Northside Ball Diamonds. So this winter, we hope to conduct a planning process with the neighborhood and continue to better meet level of service in the north side and west side. There's multiple other planning projects going on. The downtown master plan, North Riverside Parks and Trails plan, which includes Caris, East Caris, Best Reed, and then also Ron's River Trail, Downtown Lions, and Kiwanis Parks are about to start their final phase of public review and comment. And we hope to be bringing you adoption of those master plans, perhaps an update in October, and almost certain request for adoption in November. So that's pretty exciting. It also falls in line with Stormwater's efforts to install an infiltration gallery under the mound in Caris Park, and remediation restoration at completion of that project would allow us to meet some of the goals of the master plan, which includes increased seating, increased play area, increased accessibility, and sustainable maintenance, all in partnership with green infrastructure and stormwater. The other piece of that moving forward is work will begin on the Higgins Avenue Bridge October 1st, and we will be working with the Parking Commission, multiple other partners, of course, MDT, as we hope to restore that area under the bridge at completion of the bridge expansion in spring, I think 22, with the plans per the master plan. And that includes a parkour course, climbing, a multi-use sports court, and a real flexible space for events parking for bikes, and also additional seating. So we'll be bringing that plan forward to you. Neil's been really involved in the build grant in the Mullen area for improved transportation corridors, including pathways, complete streets, and urban greenways or urban forest. And then he's also been our lead on the Missoula, our Mullen area master planning process. We do continue to see development and subdivision at a pretty rapid rate. We are looking at updating our parkland cash in lieu of parkland dedication appraisal methodology. We've been getting some numbers in that are I guess, incongruent with current market rates and developers not in sync with each other. And so we're going to try and tweak that language and see if we can get better consistency and assure that everybody's being treated fairly. We are proceeding with the north side pedestrian crossing improvements. We've hired HDR Engineering. We plan to replace the decking, make some improvements at the north entrance. It's a little complicated and doesn't meet ADA or accessibility, at least to the level we would like it to. Sometimes legal access does not equal convenient access. The Russell Street improvements are largely accepted. Of course, a lot of the vegetation is under warranty, and you probably have noticed some of the trees have been severely stressed. Those are still under maintenance of the contractor. Same at Van Buren, similar situation. Most of the improvements have been accepted. Some of the plant materials are still under warranty, but the transportation components of those systems, of course, are operational and actually pretty exciting. I think even our partners in the engineering, state engineer side are pretty excited about the bicycle pedestrian improvements in those facilities. We are looking at a number of minor improvements, a portalet station that meets SEPTED and in our goals for Rose Park continue. So we'll be installing a portalet station there. We are working with the Rose Society on continued improvements at the Rose Gardens and continued maintenance of that facility. And then, of course, our cyclical maintenance at Fort Missoula continues. TJ, our park development manager, is working with a couple of programs beyond pesticides and some other nonprofit organizations as we try to take our turf management plan to another level or another step and improve the quality of our turf, identify different levels of maintenance for different types of turf with athletic and super high events sites. Requiring the most maintenance, and then from there doing our best to find a place where we're using minimal amount of chemicals, very sustainable in all ways, and in functioning turf, maintainable turf, affordable turf, and then of course where practical, being able to go to very water-wise type turf grasses. Of course, we always value native vegetation. But it's not always practical in high use areas because of the wear and tear on the vegetation and the result being weeds instead of the desired vegetation. So we're trying to find that balance. And then the only other thing I have for you today, other than more than happy to accept Q&A, is we're going to do a mini orientation with our newest park board members at 4 o'clock on Thursday, outside, distancing with masks. And if anybody else would care to join us, more than welcome. That's 4 p.m. McCormick Park. Picnic tables somewhere near Currents. We'll move something into the shade. And it's always nice to be able to meet in person. Speaking of in person, we are working with the city's continuation of business during coronavirus to see if some of our meetings, particularly with Conservation Lands Advisory Committee and Open Space Advisory Committee, and then a few meetings with Park Board, are much more engaging, if you will, and at some points I think almost require that we be on the land, on site, to make good recommendations. And currently all advisory boards are limited to Zoom only meetings, and so that makes some of our business a bit challenging, and we're working closely with administration. Of course, individuals' health and safety, employees, residents, and everybody involved is of utmost importance, but we feel very confident that we can meet those requirements. And then some of the other things that necessitate our thoughtful consideration is making sure that the public can participate, and Zoom certainly allows that to a degree. But again, there's some value in that in-person meeting.
Thank you for doing that, Donna.
You're welcome, Dale. And then I do hope to have Grant before you soon. He has been working on another number of open space projects. I was thinking I'll have one more, but I guess I have a couple more. The Dean Stone acquisition, which was approved by the Open Space Advisory Committee. The Park Board gave preliminary approval pending staff on-site approval of the High, Wide, and Handsome Trail through the corridor that connects the South Hill Spur to the top of Dean Stone. That parcel acquisition should be going forward as soon as scheduling the public hearing in mid-September and the actual public hearing taking place in early to mid-October. So that's going forward. We are also looking at a trail connection along Schmidt Road, which would connect the Milwaukee corridor west of Reserve Street, west of the Clark Fork River, west of the Poplar Farm, if you will. And it would then connect to the Mullen Trail. So that would bring some pretty significant pieces together for us continuing to extend what we locally call the Milwaukee Trail and what we nationally is known as the Great American Rail Trail, which will one day connect Washington, D.C. to Seattle, Washington. So some pretty exciting projects and programs ongoing. And if once we're done with Q&A, I can jump to Ryan's presentation on budget while I try and figure out if I can share the right screen here.
Thank you, Donna. I did not see an attachment with the agenda for your report. You said an awful lot of great things there. Is there a way we can get a copy of that sent out to Park Board members?
You can, and part of the reason you didn't have it is it's off a note the top of my head. And I'd be happy to do that. Thanks, John.
No problem. We are going to go ahead and open this up to any public comment before we have any Q&A from the board. So if you have any public comment, now would be the time to raise your hand. I do not see anybody in the waiting room still. So at this time, is there any other questions or comments from board members? Donna, I do have a couple of questions. First, I received an email from Five Valleys Land Trust looking for some volunteers on the High, Wide, and Handsome Trail. So it looks like they are finishing up their work. Are they doing that in conjunction with you guys, or is that just a separate project that they're organizing volunteers to finish that trail off?
They are in conjunction, but the project is largely led by, well, the project is being led by Five Valleys Land Trust in partnership with Mountain Bike Missoula. And that was the preliminary agreement or the preliminary referral we brought to the park board early this spring. I think it must have been way back in February, possibly March, allowing that trail, if you will, to come forward as part of the overall package in the acquisition, as long as it met our specifications. And so Morgan and Grant have been up there quite often, and then Neil and I will be joining them in Five Valleys for a site visit tomorrow as we look at what things need to be finished up with those volunteer days, but huge volunteer project. And then you may be aware that MTB Missoula also received another RTP, Recreation Trails Program grant for this coming fiscal we're in now, that's recently started, to connect the top of this trail, the High, Wide, and Handsome, to the loop around the Dean Stone towers, communication towers, and then it'll go along the Miller Creek Patty Canyon Ridge on the Miller Creek side and come back in over by Sam Braxton Trailhead. So some pretty unique trail connections, and it starts to make, I think, southeast Missoula feel a lot like the greater Rattlesnake and Jumbo as far as public access for an awful lot of citizens, where they can do that right out their back door.
I actually got to do a little sneak peek hike on that backside last week, and it is unbelievable. The views down the Bitterroot are just spectacular. So that's going to be really exciting. One other question from me, Donna, is at last month's park board meeting that we had at Fort Missoula Regional Park, there was some talk of some possible grants that would help and assist with completion of the Bellevue Bike Park and maybe Syringa. If you mentioned it, I'm sorry I missed it, but was there any activity on that over the last month?
We haven't seen any particular grants come through specific to beneficial to Bellevue or Syringa. I think Syringa's best option would be another round of RTP as we close that one out. And then we also currently we have an RTP grant that's active, which means we have not yet spent all the funds on the Waterworks Hill Trailhead project as part of the open space bond match. And generally what we find with our RTP requests, it's best to close one out before we request the next one. It increases our chances of funding significantly. Related to Bellevue, we've had some neighborhoods, Ninkpada in the Farviews Patty Canyon area is another real active neighborhood group, just so wanting any flat park. Ninkpada has been identified so that they don't have to travel all the way down into Playfair Park to do anything that involves a ball without having to chase it all the way down Whitaker into Playfair Park anyway. And so some of the grants that we are looking at is the Land and Water Conservation Fund has been funded by Congress in full, which is the first time that's happened to my knowledge since the 70s. And so we're waiting for more information on that, trying to check the, so there'd be a stateside set aside of the LWCF. The federal government will retain a good part of it itself for federal lands in the National Park Service, but there's going to be a big stateside piece. And that is where park improvements that we hope to see happen in any number of our sites, Caris, Ninkpada, Bellevue, McCormick, could take advantage of LWCF funding. So we're getting ourselves ready for that application.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 3.2, the budget and CIP update. And Donna, are you taking this for Ryan?
I am. And is my budget up on your screen?
It is.
Oh, yay. I'm so excited when I grab the right one. I don't know why it's not more intuitive, but it might just be me. So we had it's been obviously a very tight budget year for the city for a bunch of reasons, predominantly coronavirus. Now, many of the expenses, direct expenses of managing for COVID-19, sick, specifically related to COVID-19, have been reimbursable through federal aid and or state pass-through. But at the same time, the city council and the mayor made a commitment to the taxpayers of Missoula, the residents, recognizing that challenges are existing all over the place to not increase taxes, property taxes. Well, that's challenging in the light of the fact that costs of doing business are going up, whether it's a collective bargaining agreement, wage increase, health costs, in some cases, utility, though those have stayed pretty stationary, if you will, or have not changed much. So anyway, we made several requests, and what we were asked to do is Parks and Recreation did have a reserve fund balance of just about almost 1.5, real round numbers here, because I find those are easier to remember and retell the story. And we wanted to set aside about a third of that for future emergencies. And then we had some, we also set aside funds for shortfalls in revenue Obviously, we had a wonderful summer at Splash, Montana, and in our summer camps. The number of thank yous and notes of appreciation and and thank you not only for having the program, but for holding the program or opening the facility so safely that we felt so comfortable has been just very gratifying to all of our staff. So huge successes this summer in all areas related to, supporting our community goals of equity and inclusion and healthy and outdoors. But that didn't always mean that it penciled really well. And so we've also set aside funds for shortfalls. You might remember that we had a closed Currents last spring, and it was closed till June. And so we were closed for about 3 of our best income months at Currents out of the entire fiscal year. And then Splash could only operate in sessions. And so we had about 130 people total per session, 90-minute session. And I think we ran 4 or 5 sessions a day. Shirley can correct me. And we filled those sessions all the way through the summer. As soon as it got warm and we were able to figure out how to manage all those additional registrations online, they were super well received. But now we are, maybe serving 1,000 people a day, where the capacity of the pool is not even 1,000, closer to about 600, where the capacity of the pool at any given moment is 1,500 swimmers. So it does have some impact. Of course, we were also able to save funds. So this is a little bit of a background on our recreation program services. So of that 1.5, setting aside for additional costs incurred, not only in places like aquatics and camp programs, but also across the board, we've been also incurring a lot of additional costs related to just managing the system. We've had more vandalism and more unauthorized uses, behaviors, camps, cleanups, staffing needs than ever in my memory at Parks and Recreation. And I've been in the business for quite a long time and director since 2002. And we continue to see considerable vandalism and damage to the system, and are doing our very best in working with police to manage that. And then, as most of you know, we've seen immense increase in users of all aspects of the park system that are not places of gathering. So they are not places where we generate revenue. So we haven't had the revenue from tournaments, from major events. And not only have we not had that, but neither has our businesses experienced the typical revenue inflow that they receive because of all of the large events in parks. So taxes were held steady. We have accounted for future rainy day events. We've accounted for our current rainy day event. And that still left us some funds for one-time expenditures, which is what I wanted to touch on. Minor utility increases of just under $4,000. Our conservation mill levy stayed whole. There was not a decrease in taxable valuation like there was in the general fund. And the reason that the conservation stewardship mill levy and the park district stayed more stable is it's doesn't tax business, and the general fund does, and so our tax base stayed pretty stable. So the conservation land stewardship program will continue, and Morgan will talk more about that when I'm done here. We did get a one-time funding for Redfern Park and the trees in the Canyon Creek Village area, which was came in with the airport annexation last year. We did receive additional funding for the Department of Transportation improvements on Orange Street, Van Buren, and Russell. This is one time, again, all of these are, and so we'll have to ask for them again in the coming fiscal year. We've got some baseline support for aquatics as we continue to need to do cyclical maintenance. And we built the aquatics facilities In 2004 and 2005, we did our pro forma and business plan ahead of that. One of the things we did not do with Aquatics was cyclical maintenance for the 5, 10, 15, and 20-year cyclical maintenance. We have done that with Fort Missoula. And so some of that is represented in, a limited amount of that is represented in some of these numbers, as well as operational costs in particular, just so that we can continue to do business at a high quality, a high standard. Community-based programs. This is the Lowell Neighborhood Community Center at Westside Park and Lowell School. We had some unfunded trail maintenance from the past. We've moved a good chunk of money into our park asset management plan. If you remember, if you've been on the board long enough, David completed a park asset management plan back in, it was either 2012 or 14, year escapes me at the moment. And we recognized we had a $5 million plus deferred maintenance bubble, and that we needed about $500,000 a year to try to begin tackling that. And we needed about just under $300,000 in annual increase to operations to do routine annual cyclical maintenance to extend the life of our facilities. We have that currently built up as an ongoing budget item to $100,000 for this 1 year only. We're adding $150,000. So we're going to try and tackle a number of small deferred maintenance items across the system. And we will get you more updates on what exactly those are. They could vary from a new roof to a variable frequency drive pumps to help us better sustain irrigation systems. We're still super challenged in old parks like Playfair with really antiquated pipe systems for irrigation. So that this isn't a panacea, but it's a really good Band-Aid that's going to help us for this year and moving forward. The other thing we were able to do is we have continued to work really well in partnership with our partners at Missoula Public Works Utilities, which is water, stormwater, Garden City compost, wastewater. And we have a lot of shared goals. And in fact, we do a lot of similar work, and we are constantly leapfrogging over each other, mostly holding hands when we do that to provide better green infrastructure. And so that allows us to look at adding a maintenance worker to help with that. The other thing we have going or in the budget is a water truck with the open space bond tree reforestation project. We'll be adding more and more trees. So between conservation lands, stormwater initiatives, park development, new park development, and then our reforestation efforts, we do need a water truck. This one will actually have baffles in it. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then our communications and marketing program over the past year related to COVID has been outstanding. And because we are spending such a large amount of Becky's time on communicating what is, projects like Rattlesnake Dam, for example, which we've actually transferred some of that now over to Public Works because they also have a communications person. But any of our new projects, any of our public processes, any of our announcements, all of our signage, almost all of our signage comes through this. And so we need to continue to market. We also feel there's going to be a need to market our programs going forward because there's going to be a new normal, if you will, as we come out of coronavirus or learn to live with it successfully. And so that's, this is a 1 year budget expenditure of just over $500,000. And next meeting, then we'll have more time so that Ryan can finish work with finance and we can close out some of our fiscal year 20 numbers, and we'll give you a more detailed budget and CIP update.
Thank you, Donna. That was a lot of information in a short period of time. Before we open up for questions or comments from the board, if there is any public comment on this agenda item, please enter the waiting room and raise your hand. Seeing no one entering the waiting room or any public comment, are there any questions or comments from the board?
This is Ross. I just wanted to repeat what Donna said. The coordination between Parks and Public Works has been great, especially with Morgan and Grant and Neil. They've all been awesome to work with.
This is Dale Harris. And Donna, are you going to present CIP stuff?
I think I'll be better prepared to present that next time. Our projects and planning team is still working with our business team to clarify what we have. And so the primary CIP funded items are either through open space bond or the north side pedestrian crossing and the west side playground. There's a bunch of other smaller projects, and we'll try and put something together that's easier to consume than listening to my narrative on it.
Thank you. And also, the spreadsheet you just presented, is that the $500,000, is that coming out of the Park District reserves?
Yes.
So that's above and beyond any other budget items for 2020. That's in response to COVID.
Correct.
Thank you.
So Donna, this is Margie. I have a question. You brought up about the vandalism, and that I've heard ever since I've been on the board, which isn't very long though, that's been an issue. And I know during the March when everything was closed down, and like you said, no, the eyes were out there that there was a lot going on. Is it still continuing? I mean, at a high level of abuse or whatever you want to call it, of vandalism on public lands and property?
It is, and the change from March, where a lot of the use, our open space and park ambassador program really helped us in April and May, until we had to put all of our program staff and maintenance staff back in the field because we were fully open and opening programs. A lot of that early stuff was really development of new trails, walking off trails. You know, it was a little bit less challenging, if you will. It was more us with a very limited staff trying to train ourselves and citizens at the same time of best practices during a pandemic. What we're seeing now, some of the most difficult has been huge amounts of garbage left behind, a lot of graffiti all over the place related to national and international riots and challenges around, you know, whether it's anti-police, Black Lives Matter, rent, socioeconomics, any kind of messaging that you can think of that's obviously very current, it's very valid, but it's still costly to manage. The other thing that we are seeing, particularly downtown and, for example, the Madison Street Bridge, we just discovered a significant amount of conduit bent and potential for wires to be broken that might be carrying fiber for communications. And that is coming from a huge number of people finding their own way to play. And one of those ways to play has been jumping off the Madison Street underbridge, hanging from conduit, I guess, when you do it, or climbing out there from conduit. Finally, we have a significant population that's found themselves unsheltered or has found Missoula a good place to be at this time. And we just don't have the facilities to support that many people in an unauthorized camping environment, if you will. But at the same time, it's a very sensitive issue in managing a pandemic when people are unsheltered, homeless. And so we're trying to balance that while working with all the partners around housing, homelessness, policing, and public spaces.
Thanks, Donna.
John, I have another question.
Go ahead.
Donna, would you put up that spreadsheet again, please? Can we share it? So if you look at the CLM revenue, when would you explain how that is the conservation mill levy an annual deposit into the park district, or does it go into another budget that expires at the end of the fiscal year?
The conservation lands, conservation stewardship mill levy is perpetual. So it is annual and ongoing. It's real round numbers, about $500,000. And then we do a transfer of the mill levy in the park district. We, if you will, bring them together. So Morgan has one budget from which he spends, but we do track which monies are spent under which activity.
And they're obligated when they come in?
Yes, they are obligated when they come in.
And what's the budget now? What's the ending balance on the park district as a whole?
We had a reserve fund of just under 1.5 million, and I think it came out to somewhere just over 1.3, I guess, to be accurate. And then we set aside, if you will, a rainy day, an amount that we want to make sure we carry over year to year to year, because that's just good fiduciary practices. And then we also did a set aside of just over 300, or maybe it was 400,000 in anticipation of aquatics and other program shortfalls, or
Got it.
costs that might be greater that are no longer reimbursable, because we don't know what Congress will do as the pandemic continues and those costs also continue.
And we're in 2021 as of July 1st?
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donna. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 3.3, Conservation Lands Management Season Highlights Update with Morgan.
Hi guys, me again. So I'm going to try to share a screen here again. Yeah, so I apologize. I meant to give this presentation. I usually come and give you guys a quick highlight reel of the great work that myself and my team have been doing. Early spring, this presentation was actually set to be presented to y'all at our March Park Board meeting, but obviously that got canceled. And I will apologize in advance. I'm usually pretty much a well-oiled machine, because I've given this presentation like to 3 or 4 other groups before I get to Park Board, but I haven't even looked at this thing for 6 months. So some of it's gonna have to come back to me as I get going. Ideally though, you know, every year we track a bunch of our work, and I kind of put together our big season highlights and then also our plans for 2020 with the intent of kind of getting this in front of all my boards, committees, and partnering and partners that I give presentations to in late winter, early spring, to kind of give you a
Morgan?
Yes.
This is Dale Harris. So is this through 2020, June 30th? Or is it 2019? Is this a year old or recurrent?
This is a year old. So this is going to give you a heads up, gives you the highlights of what we did last year, and then what our plans were for this year. And so I'm just gonna, by the end of the presentation, you'll be all the way caught up to where we are today, pretty much.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess to start off, this picture at the beginning of the presentation is obviously not taken from Missoula Conservation Lands, but it is really highlights some of the things that both Donna and Ross were talking about as far as our good partnerships in between other departments that we work with. This is actually Glacier Lake up in the Rattlesnake Wilderness. We've been working with our partners over at Missoula Water on some of the management plans, long-term management plans for 8 lakes and 10 dams up in the Rattlesnake Wilderness. And so this is actually a picture of a trip that we took up in 2019 to do some initial vegetation surveys on the dams here in this drainage. So that in itself is another project that has been kind of slowly evolving as we've transitioned from removing the Rattlesnake Reservoir and dam here on Rattlesnake Creek towards looking at what the city is going to ultimately do with those 8 lakes and 10 dams up in the Rattlesnake Wilderness. And I think it's a really cool project in the sense that we've got all of Missoula Water's engineers working on it. We've got Trout Unlimited. We've got our conservation land staff providing some resources to the project. And it really is building on this formula that we evolved with the Rattlesnake Dam that we just finished removing on Rattlesnake Creek. So let's see if I can advance this. Perfect. I threw in a couple extra slides here just because I know we've got some new board members, but as far as our conservation lands management goals, our big 3 goals that we have are conserve natural and cultural resources, protect and enhance native habitats, and provide outdoor recreational and educational opportunities on the lands we manage. And not all of these lands are created the same or are managed the same. In red, you see our park preserves. Right now, and this is a little outdated, we're I think just now getting close to 4,500 acres. But park preserves are the large contiguous open spaces. You can really think of those as kind of nature first with passive recreation. Public natural areas, Greenough Park and Bancroft Ponds are great examples of public natural areas. Great intact areas with higher levels of public use. Lots of public education that go on, but a little smaller in size. And then our urban parklands with special resources. And so some of them include, the triangle out at Fort Missoula. This blue area, I don't manage a lot of the parks through downtown Missoula, but I do co-manage them with our developed parks team, especially when it comes to riparian health and managing that native vegetation along the river. So another thing, all these pictures were taken last year by staff, so I always like to include some of those folks in these presentations so you get to see some of the work we do and some of the conditions we do it in. Here's a seeding project in late fall last year up on, gosh, I don't even know where that is because it's so socked in, probably in the North Hills. A lot of things we track every year. In 2019, as far as revegetation goes, we put down a fair amount of seed, not near as much as in 2018. We just didn't have as good a seeding year. We did plant just over 6,000 native trees and shrubs and herbaceous plants across about 5 acres of open space and public parkland. Sprayed about 107 acres of weeds across 462 acres of land. The majority of the herbicide applications we do are just spot spraying, so we're covering a big area, targeting individual weeds or small patches. Did a fair amount of hand pulling. We actually more than doubled the amount of areas that we hand pulled last year compared to 2018, where we only did about 3 acres. And we've got some target weeds there that we usually pull. For the first time, in about a decade, we did not have a sheep grazing program. And it looks like we obviously did not have one this year again. We're trying to get one back together for next year. For those of you that are hike a lot on the Jumbo Saddle and especially on the North Hills as well, you can see a few years of rest now of those weeds. I, for the first time in a decade, have started to get a ton of complaints about spotted knapweed on Jumbo Saddle again. And those have pretty much stopped for the past 6-7 years because we've basically been keeping that plant under control with the sheep grazing program. But last year, 2019 was the first year that we were not able to field that program. some more numbers. Had a pretty good volunteer year. Had just under 2,500 hours of volunteer labor. Really, the biggest single day was Washington Middle School. They brought out 120 volunteers in a single day to do some work at Bancroft Ponds. We are actively trying to close that year about 1.13 miles of user-created trails or deleterious trails. Last year, we also had, in 2019, a pretty big trail construction year. Even though it's only 0.96 miles, the majority of the trails that we did were pretty big trails, and I've got some photos of that. A little bit of thinning on Mount Jumbo. Another significant project last year was we actually did a 12-acre logging project on the South Hill Spur. To my knowledge, this is the only time we've actually successfully commercially logged any portion of city open space. And I've got some photos of that operation and some more background on that project as well later in the presentation. Still combating a bunch of invasive trees. I would say this is probably one of our hardest areas as far as invasive species to keep up on. We're dealing with lots of biomass, a lot of areas that are being impacted. Last year, we actually removed about 6.5 acres of invasive trees from the Rattlesnake Greenbelt and along the Clark Fork River. So a huge increase in that program last year. Here's some pictures of that South Hill Spur logging project. This actually, we had thinned the majority of the South Hill Spur and the upper portions of the property that are were just basically had large diameter trees that were beyond what we could feasibly do with a thinning contract. Five Valleys Land Trust had gotten a grant and we're looking at doing some logging on lands that they are now selling to the city. We were able to expand that project by an additional 12 acres and actually manage that forest as a forest versus, stopping the work at a property boundary. This area really made sense for this project because we did desperately need to reduce some of the density of trees on site, and the site had already been logged in the past and had a really good road system already in place, so it was able to be done with very minimal disturbance. And actually this spring, the area is bouncing back quite well. It's looking really good. We had Conservation Lands Advisory Committee up there in July to look at some of that. Last year was an absolutely phenomenal year for grants, donations, and fees. The biggest thing was a $125,000 grant we got for Rattlesnake Dam removal. This was a Montana State RRGL grant. We also got a Universal Trail $50,000 grant for Waterworks Hill Trail project. We got Bancroft Ponds. You heard from some of the Bancroft Ponds leadership team. They got some money for the Bancroft Ponds project. And then a fair amount of donations and about $13,000 in both special use permits, fees, and then also sale of those logs from the South Hill Spur. Over and all in total, we raised about $210,000 last year, which made it the single largest year as far as bringing in soft dollars for the work we do. Always like to show how that how that jives with the rest of our budget. Overall, we've still been bringing in about 27 cents on every tax dollar received for the Conservation Lands Program through grants, donations. And since 2008, when I came on board and started keeping records, we've brought in approximately $1,233,000 and some change for this work. We saw several new additions. We got about 150 acres of new open space. This is the Bluebird property in Lower Grant Creek. What's significant about this is it connects with about 600 acres of existing open space that is either currently city owned or owned by a private entity on which we have an easement. So this is potentially 750 acres of new open space that could come online in the Grant Creek, North Hills kind of area over time. And that's something that the Conservation Lands Advisory Committee is going to start taking on some of the planning for recreation planning for that site this winter and next year. We got 3 major new infrastructure projects in our parklands. The big one was West Broadway Island, large trail, 2 large bridges, new entryway. We got Syringa Bike Skills Park that you can see here in the back. And then we also got a small dog park in Hellgate Park, located in Hellgate Canyon. Some of our big accomplishments, these are some hardcore volunteers doing a road rehab project up on the South Hill Spur. We had last year was probably, and this has actually been repeated this year, I would say this spring we've constructed more trail than, and or done more trail rehab than we have in the last several years combined. But in 2019, we really hit the ground running in the fall on the North Hills, did some major reroutes coming in the Homestead Trail, rebuilding the whole entry to the Sunlight Property Trailhead, did a reroute on the Lower L Trail, did a bunch of reroutes in Tamarack, built a universal trail on Bancroft Ponds, did major reroutes to get up to a construction overlook at the Rattlesnake Dam, and then more work in Moose Can Gully in the South Hills. We also saw a huge growth in new partnerships. We had multiple collaborative projects between other city departments. I mentioned Missoula Water, but also Missoula Stormwater and Missoula Wastewater, actually all the waters. We've been doing great work with those folks and really pulling together some cool projects. We had a pretty significant restoration project with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And then you heard some today again from the Lewis and Clark neighborhood about all the great stuff we're doing at Bancroft Ponds. Oh, and the Rattlesnake Dam is fully funded. So as far as trail projects, I mean, I guess a lot of people always ask what's the plan, and I tend to always forward our 2015 trails inventory. We are still picking away at the 350 problem points and 20 miles of user-created trails and 2.5 miles of trails that don't meet any of our specs as far as slope. And so that 2015 trails inventory that we did is continuing to really direct how we spend our maintenance and our reroute dollars. And then we have a bunch of new projects as well. In 2019, we really focused on rehab of major problem areas where we had erosion, veg loss, braiding, and public safety. And then our new trail construction really focused on that inclusivity and accessibility. Here's a picture of some of those 120 Washington middle schoolers that came out and built our universal trail in Bancroft Ponds. Worst day I've ever seen for doing this type of work. It was rainy. We had one kid go pre-hypothermic. We got them all warmed up. Overall, those guys just spread, oh gosh, it's just tons and tons and tons of gravel and built a really great trail. Here's Loyola Sacred Heart working on a L Trail reroute. This is our big reroute over a severely eroded section of L Trail. This is kind of the bottom of the L Trail where you first start up. Some of the most eroded trail on our open space land. We built a reroute that you can see. We actually had a paraglider take a picture because they were coming up while we were building, and so it gives you an idea of what we were doing there. Busted out a bunch of trail all in one day, really got rid of a nasty section of trail. The other big project that we continued to pick away on for most of the summer was rebuilding a universal trail. This is the end of Lincolnwood subdivision that connects Lincolnwood subdivision all the way up to the Rattlesnake Dam site. And so this was a part of the Rattlesnake Reservoir Recreation Plan that you all adopted, was to provide greater access and a trail that had less user conflict to get folks up to the Rattlesnake Reservoir site. And so this was definitely not your average trail. I mean, I think we constructed this as 8-foot wide pack gravel, high use trail. This is a major reroute over this little side trail that is probably, I had the most complaints of any as far as user complaints, as far as bikes running into people or people running into people at this location. And so we replaced it with a really nice wide trail that has good sight lines to get people up to watch the dam removal. Invested a ton of time in the North Hills as well, dealing with trail braiding sections, sections of trail that were never really built well. And so some before and afters of those sites. lots of earth moving, lots of dirt work, and all done by our friends over at the Montana Conservation Corps. Most of this work, and I have to say, was stuff that we were not able to do in the past because we were really focusing on volunteer work days or volunteer days that Montana Conservation Corps would kick us. This, for the first time last fall, I got 2 works. That was 2 weeks of Montana Conservation Corps and then another 2 weeks of dedicated staff this spring, all funded through the Conservation and Stewardship Mill Levy. So the ability to actually put some of this work under contract was realized at the end of 2019 and now at the beginning of 2020. Some other great projects: Moose Can Gully, building bog bridges over seeps. Here's more pictures of that Bancroft pond trail. We did a major reroute going up from the Tamarack gravel pit up to the North Loop Road on Mount Jumbo. And then we had, as I mentioned, one of our great highlights is the cooperative projects across the city. Rattlesnake Dam is now removed. I don't know if you guys saw, but this weekend, the creek got flipped to its new channel. For the first time in 120 years, that creek is free flowing in an actual channel versus a bypass channel. We've got our waterworks trailhead and trail. I'm not going to get into that. But that is all coming this year. And then, of course, we're working on some of those long-range plans for the Rattlesnake Wilderness Dams. Some other ways that we're expanding cooperation across city departments with Missoula utilities. We are looking at putting in some more experimental plant propagation, expanding our plant propagation program out at Garden City Compost and the wastewater facility over at the city's Poplar Farm. And so we're actually looking at putting in a seed nursery, and this project has actually expanded quite a bit, and we're looking at moving some of the urban forestry programs out there as well. And then, of course, you know, you guys just adopted this plan, but this is allowing for the Clark Fork Islands Recreation Management Plan, which is really going to activate a lot of this land behind city wastewater and city compost that the city's owned for years with no public access. And so that's linking those lands to the Tower Street Conservation Area. Some of the other cool projects we did with stormwater was a bank repair project in Greeno Park. I'm not going to talk about the Lewis and Clark Neighborhood Project because you just heard about that in one of the last agenda items. We're starting to, and this has already happened, but we're looking at a different way of managing vegetation on Missoula's levees. I'm not going to really get into that. We're also looking at developing a habitat and water quality project in Takema Park. Here's some of those pictures of that before and after of the bank stabilization in Greeno Park. This finished last fall. Great cooperative project between Missoula Stormwater, City Parks, and then Trout Unlimited came in to do the final design. But we basically rebuilt a whole section of bank. It's recovering really well. Absolutely love this photo to give you an example of the type of equipment we use in Parks and Rec versus what contractors use. Slightly larger in the private sector, I guess. Another great project, we started a big push, and you guys might have seen some of the media on this, to develop a collectible population of bitterroots out at Fort Missoula Regional Park. And this is a project that has been under works for about 4 or 5 years since the beginning, right when we were, you know, developing the interpretive signage that went around the CCC prairie with the Salish and Kootenai tribes. This project really spurred from those initial meetings. And so we started to replant bitterroots in a side of town that was, for millennia, one of the most loved and best bitterroot populations in the valley. So we're trying to get a little fragment of that back. And so we had a bunch of kids come down to help us with that from the Salish and Kootenai tribe. Big projects for 2020. We've got about $3 million of major habitat restoration and outdoor recreation projects moving forward. Removal and restoring the Rattlesnake Dam, like I said, that is almost done. We should be pretty much wrapped up with that by early October. We're about to get the Waterworks Trailhead RFP out to start looking at rebuilding that. And We are also about to send out an RFP to begin design and engineering of the Clark Fork River access sites. Both of those are open space bond projects, both of which we wanted to get going this spring, but COVID kind of put that on the back burner. One of the other big projects we're moving forward in 2020 is in 2019, we completed a major inventory of every one of our trailheads. This has never been done. What surprised me is I actually manage 171 separate access points. So these aren't just trailheads, but they're anytime a trail crosses from one jurisdiction onto city jurisdiction. So anytime we have the public accessing into one of our city conservation lands. We've got about 19 parking lots. We took pictures of and mapped 394 individual signs, 45 trash cans, 39 mutt mitts. And basically, one of our open space projects, bond projects, is to upgrade all of our trailheads and bring them up to a standard. And we are getting dangerously close to being able to start this project. We're looking at actually starting it this fall and really getting into it this spring. Big priorities for 2020. You know, I think the biggest priority that we're looking at, and of course, it's really funny looking back at this through the lens of COVID-19, but our big goal this year was to expand habitat conservation, environmental stewardship, and sustainability of projects within the city of Missoula. And so we've just made such headway on these cooperative projects. We wanted to really start to look a little broader and really work to prioritize some of the city's long-term sustainability goals. Also continue to be practice more cooperative conservation, really start to bring climate resiliency and inclusivity into more of our projects. And then of course, and this has always been an important one for me, is to strive for those fiscally responsible project implementation, not just from bringing in grants to get stuff funded, but really look at that long-term maintenance and what those maintenance costs are going to be. And this has all been well supported in multiple plans, and every time we go out in any kind of survey, you know, it's well supported by the public. And then of course we had several new professional maintenance staff to add. And this isn't new to you guys. You've heard about this program being evolved, but we really in 2020 we're kicking off the birth of Missoula's Ecosystem and Services Division. And so, and I only got a few more slides here, but so I'm almost done. But really, to get into that, you know, what are ecosystem services? And they really are those direct and indirect contributions that ecosystems provide to humans. And this really falls into three main categories: as regulating services like our climate, our water, our provisioning services, whether it's just fresh water, drinking water, materials, food. And then those cultural services like our recreation and our tourism and just those other experiences that we have out on the landscape. And so all of these from the ecosystem contribute to not just the elements of human well-being, but also our greater natural world. And so with this new Ecosystem Services Division, some of you may have heard, I've actually taken a promotion. I'm now the Ecosystem Services Superintendent. And so I am overseeing both the Conservation Lands Management Program and the Urban Forestry Program with the long-term goal to actually develop that into more of its own division. And we're trying to merge some of the great work we do in both of those programs together, and then also continue to offer and do those cooperative projects across the city where we're bringing in more green infrastructure, we're bringing more habitat into our urban environments to soften them. I mean, we've got all these great plans about pollinator gardens and stormwater capture and using native plants within our urban landscapes. Being able to actually have a division that really works more towards that versus having it be something that we just do as an aside. We've got obviously some great outdoor recreation opportunities that are expanding across the valley just infinitely, which is awesome to see, but really being able to stay on top of that and continue to expand these systems in a smart way and then get them funded and then have them managed at a high level. And then always alternative funding, volunteerism, and public education is incredibly important in all we do. And one thing that I think as a department, the Parks Department has really always excelled at. To give you an idea how this is going to be structured, there's my position here. We've got the Conservation Lands Manager, which is still vacant, the City Forester, which is still vacant, and then our Urban Forestry team and our Conservation Lands Management team. Unfortunately, this year we've also lost our Conservation Lands Maintenance Tech. We're looking at refilling that position. So we do have a key maintenance position that's empty. And so we've definitely been kind of burning, we've been spread really thin this year, I guess. I've been actively kind of playing both of these roles while trying to also do this ecosystem services role. And then we've had a bunch of turnover within Conservation Lands Maintenance. So we're trying to backfill a lot of these positions. And just kind of toe the line. So sorry, but that's a really quick season update in a nutshell for at least 2019, and hopefully brings you kind of up to speed with where we are here in 2020. And with that, I'd be happy to just take any questions from the board.
Morgan, this is John. Thanks for the presentation. On that last slide you did with your organizational chart on there, how old is that?
That chart was put together in February of 2020.
Yes.
It'd be nice to get an update on that, if you don't mind. So, and I know that you kind of started the presentation by saying you didn't have a chance to do this a lot earlier. And so I know you probably have an update to this. When you get it updated, it would be nice for us to see that as well, so that we're looking at more current information.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to open this last agenda item to any public comment. If there's anyone who is wanting to be in the waiting room, please do so now before we open up to the board for final comments and questions. Seeing no one in the waiting room, are there any comments or questions from any members of the board?
I have questions.
Fire away, Dale.
Morgan, would you go back two slides?
This one?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. That item 3 is very interesting. I have a request. Would you explore this? Would you explore this item with CLAC? Especially with the thought of creating some kind of volunteer ambassador program for conservation lands?
For sure.
And I'm still confused about how, do the numbers in this report go through June 30th or June 30th, whatever it is, the end of June, 2020 or 2019?
So I'm sorry, some of the numbers from the very beginning?
Yes.
Those go from January 1st, 2019 to December 30th, 2019.
Oh, thank you very much.
So this is all the work. We keep pretty detailed records and GIS files on all the work we do, and we don't really have time to pull those together until the winter. And so we typically are pulling that information together in December, January every year, and then presenting it out to all our boards and committees in February, March.
Got it.
But we won't actually have numbers from 2020 until, the new year of 2021.
I got it.
So the reports that you're giving are calendar year, not fiscal.
Yes, I do it by season because so much of our work is seasonal.
Yeah, that's a great clarification.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier on. Thank you.
And lastly,
yeah.
Could you describe what's going on with Mount Jumbo in terms of the browning of is it whatever that forest population, maybe it's Doug fir?
Yeah, so that's Doug fir tussock moth, and we've had a couple years where we've had little outbreaks of tussock moth. There was a small outbreak on that same area, Jumbo, last year. There was a huge outbreak in the South Hills. It's a defoliator. It's a native insect. It just kind of builds up to a certain point and then has these little populations, explosions. It typically removes all the needles from the trees. Where we saw this same level of impact up on the South Hill Spur last year, I would say 80 to +% of the trees that were hit were fine. They all leafed back out the next year, and they were fine. And so, you know, I would say the majority of the trees that you're looking out up there at Mount Jumbo are still alive. They just had all their needles removed. I'm sure we will lose some. Overall, those forests are incredibly young and incredibly dense, and so losing some of those younger Douglas fir trees would not be a bad thing.
So there's no predicted human interaction to deal with the infestation?
The only way to effectively deal with it is to aerially spray insecticide, and that is for trees that have very little value and the non-target impacts. You know, I think where they have done this around town is areas like picnic places where people have picnics, where the moth actually has the larva has hairs that can cause, I think it's protosis. No, not protosis. It's some kind of an itchy rash. And so they have done a few treatments around town in areas where they've had a bunch of these tussock moths in areas where a lot of people convene. But overall, it's not really an effective treatment for a large scale infestation like that.
Thank you. And lastly, what's the status of the urban forest recruitment?
We are finishing up we may have one last viable candidate. Unfortunately, when we sent out and when it got advertised, it was right when COVID hit. We only got 14 applicants, and we're not able to successfully find an applicant from that pool. And so we've got one last option here where we might be able to draw an applicant from a separate pool, but we more than likely will have to refly the position here soon.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks, Dale. Any other questions or comments?
I guess this is Ross. Morgan, I just want to say I think the trail improvement work that you've been doing around the rattlesnake and all those areas it's been awesome. I've been on some of the trails and I didn't even notice it was done until I thought back afterwards and I was like, where'd that hard part go on the trail? And now it's gone. But I guess I was just curious what other trail improvement projects like you see like that coming up in the future and how you kind of prioritize them.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we definitely we're getting to the point where we're actually running out of some of our low-hanging fruit, where it's just easy fixes without a lot of input. You know, I think this spring we've really been focusing on implementing some of our recreation plans. You know, we did a bunch of trail construction this spring just because we had such extensive flooding out at Tower Street Conservation Area, so we had to do a bunch of rebuild. And then we also had, of course, those final trails to get up to the Rattlesnake Reservoir site. You know, this fall and certainly next year, I think we're going to shift over to a lot of new construction based on our rec management plans that we have adopted. And so I see a lot more construction out at Tower Street Conservation Area. And then starting to move forward with some of our trails up to the Rattlesnake Reservoir site. And then also, you know, bringing online some new trails with the Dean Stone project.
Awesome.
And I think the other thing, the one thing that I think we're moving to really quickly, just so you guys are aware, is we need to start to figure out large reroute plans when we start to look at some of our worst trails, like the Bengali Trail up the side of Mount Jumbo and the Backbone Trail on Mount Jumbo, where we've just got unsustainable slopes, trails that were never really constructed to spec. That's kind of the large multi-year project that's going to take more planning versus some of these smaller segments where we're just doing improvements on really bad spots on trail systems that are actually relatively good shape.
Thank you, Morgan. Any other questions for Morgan? All right, we'll move into agenda item number 4, future or held items.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Morgan.
John, this is Ross. I gotta sign off. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ross. I would like to add a future item, please. I've been spending a lot of time up at the Southside Spur, and it's a beautiful area. It's very open, very sunny. Can get kind of windy a little bit up there. I think this adding of the Glacial Lake marker is going to be fantastic. I had an opportunity to speak with Karen Sippy, Trees for Missoula. She has a professor at the university who wants to design a course around building shade shelters with her. And I would like to explore the opportunity of putting a shade shelter up on that Southside Spur observation. So I would like to add that as a future item, please.
Hi, John, this is Donna. And I apologize, I might have been losing internet off and on. So if I leave you, it's not intentional. I need to get out, or Morgan needs to get out the agreement on the acquisition. I'm pretty sure we are not allowed to build a structure at that location, but we'll double check.
Okay, thank you very much.
The other thing, while I have you all, is I did forward you the staff org chart that we shared in either February or March. And it includes, Morgan just pulled his piece of that, but it's the whole department's org chart. And I sent that via email to all of you.
Thank you, Donna. Anything else for future held items? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, John, for running the meeting.
Thank you.
Oh.
Take care, everyone.